Right, should we just start again, or we just going to sort of go through it? Let's have a look. That is the official squad. I'm going to put out a poll. We've got a poll. I didn't even put up a poll. I see now my producers in there putting out polls. It's been a fantastic day, and let's talk about the big ones, shall we? Let's get into it. I'm sort of settling myself here, and let's go. Okay, so drink of water. Now we move. Big news. No number 8 in the squad, really. No out-and-out number 8, apart from Kwagga Smith. So that for me is a big absentee. No Evan Roos. And I think that that in itself is going to be quite a big absentee because we don't have a specialist number 8. So which means that, are we looking at Kobus Wiese as a number 8? Is he now a genuine option at 8? Because the fact of the matter is he's been picked over Evan Roos, which does mean when Rassie Erasmus was talking about, Evan Roos very much being part of the plans and not being excluded, he was excluded. And I said that at the time. I said I don't think that this exclusion of Evan Roos is as innocent, inverted commas, as what they were basically suggesting. They obviously just don't rate him, to be perfectly honest. And I think what's going to be very interesting moving forward is what the other number 8 options that they might look at. I mean, if you're a Franco Horn, for example, and you're sitting there, you've been excluded from the squad, Evan Roos kind of come in, come out, you're sitting there thinking, give me a go. Give me a go, because Evan Roos has not taken his chances in this box squad well enough to get into the squad consistently. And I think that in itself is going to be quite a big sort of asterisk next to his name. So I think big names that I'm almost surprised are kept are the likes of keeping Asnet and Clavacania, as well as the likes of a Vincent Koch, who was not particularly good, and excluding a Neertling for Sheer, for example, who's on standby. That doesn't surprise me with regards to Asenati ahead of Neertling, because I think that he is rated higher at the moment. They do kind of look at Asenati and Clavacania as more of an option than than Neertling for Sheer. And but I do think that's quite interesting. For example, I'm actually gonna make this graphic a little bigger so you guys can see it, because let's try and make it a little bigger so you guys can see it a little bit more. There we go. That's looking a bit better, shall we? There we go, nice and big. Now you guys can all see it. Maybe I need to have it bigger so that I saw Malcolm Marx and wasn't there, and Bongi Manambi was there. So that for me is quite an interesting one, because obviously you got the experience of Vincent Koch, and that in itself is quite interesting. So on that other note, by the way, these are the backs that have been included, and I think probably less to really go through from a backline point of view, because Faf de Klerk has been left out, as well as Makazole Mapimpi on a standby list. So the big exclusion there is Faf de Klerk. I don't think Makazole Mapimpi not making the squad is a massive sort of red flag or big exclusion, to be honest. Edel van den Berg has been retained. Morley van den Berg's been retained. So that's sort of the big exclusion, is Morley van den Berg being retained ahead of a Faf de Klerk. That for me is probably the big exclusion. Or inclusion in the backs there. So Curtly Arendse, Damien Delindi, Andre Esthuizen, Apele Fassi, Sasha Feinberg Zulu, Ethan Hooker, Jesse Creel, Cheslin Colby, Willie LaRue, Marlon Liebach, Kanan Moody, Andre Pollard, Kobus Reinach, Edwin van der Merwe, Morley van den Berg, Grant Williams, and Damian Willemse. So those are our backs for it. And I think, just before we go back to the forwards and kind of really go through it, no real surprise for me, apart from Faf de Klerk. But for me, it was either going to be Faf de Klerk or Kobus Reinach. I don't think it was ever going to be both of them. So let's talk a little bit more about the forwards over here, because I think the forwards are the interesting part at the moment. I think our backs are pretty settled, to be perfectly honest. I don't think we've got too much to really worry about with regards to, picking order. I think we kind of know that, our 3 fly halves are pretty settled. Our top scrum half and Grant Williams is pretty settled. I think Morley van den Berg is currently the second choice, to be honest. I think him being included ahead of Faf de Klerk probably also indicates that he got more minutes than the likes of a Kobus Reinach. So I think we kind of know our top 2 scrum halves. I think if you're looking at our wings, you know that it's Cheslin Colby, Curtly Arendse, Edel van der Merwe as our top 3. Makazole Mapimpi being excluded, verifies that. But I don't think too many people were sitting there thinking that Makazole Mapimpi was ahead of a of an Edward van der Merwe. And our centers are also pretty settled. This pack, however, is probably the one more under pressure, because I don't think we've been able to dominate as much as we'd like in the last few weeks. I don't think we've been able to impose ourselves, find that forward dominance. Obviously we've had very good scrums, for example, but especially against Georgia, who are a very, very physical side, I think a lot of people have spoken about the fact that we don't feel they really managed to dominate the way we kind of believe. There's big question marks, and I'm actually just going on what I'm seeing. When I say big question marks, I'm not questioning them, but what I'm seeing with the replies to comments, for example, on our videos, our social media comments, the likes of that, lots of people remain very skeptical about the likes of Vincent Koch, Bongi Mbonambi. Talks a little bit about Siya Kolisi, maybe not looking at his best. It was his first game back in over a month. I'm personally not worried about him. But some people have even mentioned the likes of Neb and Etzebeth, maybe not having the impact that they would have liked to have seen from him. And I think that there's also a couple of question marks over Franco Mostert. I think he was all right when he did play, to be honest. So the big sort of question marks for me that I would like to see ticked in this rugby championship is, who is the front row to be in the front row currently? Right now we start in the World Cup final. I think Oxen Chair starts with Wilco Louw and Malcolm Marx as that front row. Who's the next in line? Who's going to come off the bench then? Right now, we've got no Thomas du Toit in the squad, who's currently on basically a 2-week rest period, which means that the other loose head options in the squad are basically Bowen Venter and Jan-Hendrik Wessels. So is Bowen Venter now sort of up and in the long-term plans? I think that the way he played over the weekend, he could be. Jan-Hendrik Wessels being included alongside Marnus van der Merwe and Malcolm Marx and Bongi Mbonambi means that he's being included as loose head cover more than anything else. They're not looking at him as a hooker right now. In this circumstance, he's the loose head cover. Your tight heads, Vincent Koch, Wilco Louw, Asenati, and Tlabakanye. Now, I think a year's time, we might not see a Vincent Koch in the squad. We might see a Netley Bashir in the squad, or Thomas du Toit might come back in. But I think that I would like to see Asenati and Tlabakanye play in at least one of those Australia tests. Because I think that Vincent Koch, over the last weekend, for example, maybe didn't have the impact that we'd like to see from him. And that's not to say you have to bin him right now. But I think we need to look at other options. Because if he doesn't make it to the next World Cup, and Francois Herbert doesn't manage to come back from his injury the way that we'd like him to, he's out for the year, by the way. He'll only basically make a return January, February. Who are our options? And Asenati and Tlabakanye right now seems to be that current sort of third choice tight head. Maybe, fourth choice when the Francois Herbert comes back. But that's where he is. And if that's going to be the case, then we have got 2 years to try and get 15 games into him right now. He's played one test so far. He's played a game against the Barbarians. I would actually like to probably see him feature twice, to be brutally honest, against Australia. Even if he doesn't feature against Sweden, but play him twice against Australia, play him against Japan at the end of the year, if we do get that test, still to be confirmed. Play him against Wales, play him against Italy. And by the end of the year, he can have 6 games under his belt. If you can give him another 6 games next year, that means that's 12 tests. If he goes to the World Cup, he could have 12 to 13 tests under his belt. That's the kind of experience I think we're talking about. Another big call is Marnus van der Merwe or Bongi Mbonambi. Because I do think that Bongi Mbonambi is going to be feeling a bit of pressure now, because Marnus van der Merwe has been retained in the squad. There's been lots of talks about Bongi Mbonambi not having been particularly good this past incoming series. Now, from an age point of view, Bongi Mbonambi, I think he's 34 years old. He'll be 36 at the next World Cup, which is not like massively old. It's not like, oh my goodness, can't feature. He's younger than Deon Fourie was at the last World Cup, for example, younger than Dwayne Vermeulen was at the last World Cup. He obviously has had a couple of injuries, but when you're not getting to that sort of 34, 35 years old, right now, you'd go into a World Cup with a 34 years old player and you wouldn't blink. You probably go into a World Cup with a 35-year-old and you'd probably be like, yeah, I think he's fine. It was actually very interesting. I was watching a podcast last night and Ronan O'Gara was on it, who is, one of Ireland's all-top 10s and one of the biggest sort of top coaches in the world at the moment. And we only what he wants to say. And he was basically saying that's young, and he said that 33 is young. It's especially for a fly half, that's young. And I think that was quite an interesting commentary on it, in terms of the idea that we're looking at players, and I've seen it quite a lot. I've seen it in some of the comments. Somebody was saying that Quacker Smith needs to be moved on because he's old. Quacker Smith's 32 years old. You know, he's 34 at the next World Cup. That's not even old. And I think we've got a very warped concept of what is old and what is not old. And that's when, for example, I look at doing, when I do like sort of my tracking, graphs and stats and the whole thing, I look at sort of 35 plus kind of being more in the red and sort of 30 to 35 being in the orange, but generally okay. Because basically, in those sort of years, providing you haven't had injuries before or the likes of that, you should be fine. You should actually be all right. It's 35 plus where you start to get more into the sort of, maybe that's kind of when you need to move on. And we've seen it, this is the thing, everybody keeps talking about the older players, but look at the performances of Deon Fourie in the 2023 World Cup. Did he play like the oldest player in the team? Absolutely not. Look at Damian Willemse. Look at Dane Vermeulen and the performances he had in the World Cup. So something like an Eben Etzebeth, who's 33, turning 34 this year, he'll be 36 going into 35 going into the World Cup, towards the 36 at the World Cup final. That's manageable as long as that's sort of standard. So I think we need to take a little bit of a step back with regards to what it means, what's classified as old, and where we need to start panicking about certain players. Now, it's quite interesting. When I do the video about the squad announcement, I'll basically have the ages, and we'll kind of look at exactly what the ages are with regards to this kind of updated squad, because we're basically doing a bit of a squad tracker, and it kind of shows you the differences. So yes, there's question marks about, let's say, Siya Kolisi, an Eben Etzebeth, a Vincent Koch, a Bongi Mbonambi. So then that next same breath, if there's question marks about that, then what is the next generation? And the next generation here is the likes of Ruan Okia, man of the match over the weekend, for example. Marnus van der Merwe coming through for Bongi Mbonambi. You've got Asnate Ntlabakanya, next generation for Vincent Koch. Kobus Wiese, a potential replacement for an Eben Etzebeth. And I think that's why, for me, it's a bit odd that Vincent Tuka has not been kept, because, the next number 7, who is the next number 7? And that is one of the, he's such a difficult player to replace. And people talking about, Pieter-Steph Vertooy, who's going to replace him? Well, you've got the World Player of the Year you've got to try and replace. That's not an easy person. You don't just find somebody like that. You've got to try and groom somebody. Even Pieter-Steph Vertooy, let's call a spade. He was not at the level he is when he came through. In fact, he was under a lot of pressure when he came through, when they made the move to 7, that he wasn't going to cut it at 7. He was in the side that lost to, that got hammered in New Zealand. And he had to come through a lot of that kind of adversity. And then we're now seeing the Pieter-Steph Vertooy that we know. That is playing the kind of level that we're sort of expecting to see. So we don't need to worry, I think, too much at this stage. But it's about finding those next generation of players if things do go wrong. And just going to try and see if everybody keeps monitoring about the sound. From my side, absolutely nothing seems to have changed. So let me know if it's fixed itself, because nothing's changed. Nothing has happened. So if it is, then there's not much I can do. So let me know if it's sorted itself out. Sometimes it does have a few issues, but it should have sorted itself out by now. So let me know if it hasn't. It sounds fine in my head. So you'll let me know if there's still issues. But it sounds fine on my side, if maybe it's internet issues. We've had every possible issue today. So, yeah. And Harry saying sound is fine. Cool, so we're back. So for me, that's why I'm confused about Vince Tuka not being retained, because another 2 weeks with the box for me would be invaluable for him. And yes, this is the squad for Australia, and it might change for New Zealand, but I don't see this squad changing much for New Zealand. I see it changing for Argentina maybe, but this is still a much clearer reflection. If we go to the World Cup and take a 34-man squad, we'd probably cut 3 players out of the squad. Which of those players? You'd probably cut one of the props, because we currently got, I think, 6 props on this side. Jan Wessels, Bowen Venter, Ox, Asenate, Vincent Koch, Volker Low. So you probably cut one of the props down to 5 props, and you'd probably cut down one of the locks, because we currently got, well, I suppose 5 or 6 locks, depending on what you classify in Kubas Visa as. And then you might maybe look at cutting down one of the hookers and taking 2 hookers if you have a Jan Vessels, for example. Else you cut somebody out of the back line. Probably like that. You can probably cut an Ethan Hooker out of the back line. So that's how you could cut this down to a 34-man sort of World Cup squad. But what for me is going to be interesting to see is obviously we've got to try and pick a side out of this squad to take on Australia. And I would like to see in that side an Asenat and Klamakanya feature. I would love to see a Manus van der Merwe feature. I'd be interested to see if we might see Bowen Venter feature. You know, we've got, for me, it's between Jan Wessels and Bowen Venter. I'd like to see Bowen Venter, who is a much more settled lucid. And I think Jan Wessels has got lots of talent, but he just needs for me to go and scrum for a long time at the Bulls in the loosehead position where he's not had as much opportunities. And I think that's going to be interesting to sort of see when he comes in, what sort of, has he disrupted things, you know, Bowen Venter, in the way that he's come in and looked pretty good, because he was a call-up due to basically a loosehead crisis. Got 1 cap, but now he's actually been retained in the squad. And yes, we've got Thomas Toys who's resting and can be called upon, but it's still interesting that he's been retained, because they could have gone with Jan Wessels and said, right, Jan Wessels is going to be our other loosehead. We've got Oxen Chair, and if needs be, we can call him Thomas Toy. They didn't actually need to keep Bowen Venter if they didn't want him. So he's obviously impressed in camp. Manus van der Merwe is impressed in camp. He's been around for a while, in fairness. You know, the reason I'm talking like that about Bowen Venter is the fact he wasn't involved in alignment camps. You know, he wasn't on the radar, really. He's been a late addition, kind of a bit of a left field sort of addition to the squad. And that's why he's an interesting selection, because it's just come from a little bit of nowhere. I think Ruan Nokia has to be involved in that matchday squad, for example. You look at the performances over the weekend, at man of the match, and he's looking really good. But we've got the Fab Four. You've got Luat Diago, Arcus Neyman, Eben Netzebeth, Franco Mossad. Which of those players do you potentially make way to allow Ruan Nokia? And we talk about not having 7 options. You know, how much is Franco Mossad being looked at as a 7 versus a 5? How much is Ruan Venter potentially even being looked at as a possible 7? You know, how much is Kubas Visa being looked at as a 4, 8, maybe a 7 as well? Which is probably why you don't have a Vincenz Tuka, because right now, to be honest, in that squad, you don't have an out-and-out Peter Steph Toy replacement who naturally plays in the number 7 jersey week in, week out. You'd have to then move Franco Mossad to the 7, move Ruan Nokia to 7. Kubas Visa could move to 7. So you've got players who can fulfill that position, but nobody really that plays that position consistently within the squad. Let's talk about the back, shall we? And for me, I'm very keen to see what we do with our fly-offs. And before we talk about the wings, I'm going to go through some of the comments. Because I want to talk about the fly-offs in particular. And I want to know from you, because I'm actually going to put that in the comments, who starts at number 10 for Australia. That's the next poll. Who starts at number 10? Libok, Sasha, or Pollard? That's the poll. I'm going to go through some of the comments and see what everybody has to say at the moment. So East Coast Tropical Fruit was saying, what is Koch still doing there? Sif Mag says, we don't need Detoy. Not sure what he's offered us that the selector props can't. Temba says, I am shocked Vincent isn't here. Maybe he is the X factor for the All Blacks. And HJH says, our young players are to play the RGs. Christian says, I'm not sold on Tuka, but I'm a die-hard Ulrich fan. To be fair, you don't have to necessarily choose one or the other right now. I mean, I think Ulrich Lowe will be ahead of the pecking order, but I think Vincent looked very comfortable, and I think that it's worth giving him those opportunities. East Coast then asked, do you need 3 hookers if you have a swinger? Alan DeToy saying, Butterbile is the next 7 to watch for the future. Yeah, look, I don't think he's going to be there at the next World Cup, for example, but I do think he's obviously going to be fast-tracked into the system, given the fact he's been invited to camp. Astrobain says, the reason Springbok Rugby has so much depth right now is because we don't throw away our older players. And I 100% agree. I think that's a very good point. A&T said you can't get away from age. Yes, a couple can be older, but not 80% of them. But I think, again, we're talking about what is considered old. As Leon said, 34 is not old. That is until you get hurt. After a few injuries, players get old fast. And that's the thing. You know, it's a case of one man's 32-year-old is not the same as another man's 32-year-old. Because we're looking at certain players, and it's amazing how somebody has said, for example, Kwagga Smith's old, he needs to be moved on. And he's old, he's actually younger than other players who are not being mentioned in the same breath. You know, he's younger than a Peter Steff. We're same age as Peter Steff the toy. Nobody's asked Peter Steff to be moved on because of the level. 32 is not old. Maxwell Mapimpi is, 34 now? I'm playing some of his best rugby ever. I think they're just very aware that he won't make the next World Cup. I think that's probably one of the reasons he hasn't been included. But he's 34 years old and playing some brilliant rugby. In fact, he's only 35 this week. And look at the rugby he's playing. So if we look at our backs, Kurtley Arendse, Damon Delendi, Andre Estes, and Fassi, Sasha, Ethan Hooker. For me, Ethan Hooker is a very interesting inclusion. It would have been very easy to have kept him a Mapimpi and let go of an Ethan Hooker. Mapimpi's got the experience. He's got the form to justify it as well. I think a lot of people have basically been saying, we love Mapimpi, but it kind of makes sense. And it does obviously make sense to keep an Ethan Hooker who's longer, with a longer career ahead of him. But it's still a big call to make to exclude somebody who's playing great rugby, who's scored so many good tries, who's never really let the box down, to be honest. That's the big thing about, Maxwell Mapimpi. He's never really let the box down. So he's going to have to almost be moved off, despite playing great rugby, simply because in 2 years' time, he'll go into the World Cup at 37 years old. And at 37 years old, as a wing, will he have the pace? Chances are not. So I think that's a pretty big call to keep an Ethan Hooker in the squad, who only played, 24-odd minutes the entire 4-match series. So that, for me, is a big call. Jason Creel, obviously, I think will come back in for Australia. Ches and Colby, Willie LaRue being kept. We spoke about the fact that he could have also been somebody that could have dropped out. They are keeping him around there. I'll be surprised if he's involved in Australia, but maybe, again, I suppose it's one of those things when Pollard plays, he often plays kind of as a bit of a duo. But, he's very clearly, for me, third choice fullback after Fassi and Damian Willemse. Even those two, the whole conversation, lots of, the Church of Fassi is taking over at the moment. So, Kane Moody being kept, I think, it's often as a centre option, even more than a wing option. And that's really nice because it means you don't have to worry about having an extra wing. So, that's also why you can exclude a Maxwell Mapimpi. Because whilst they look at Ethan Hooker as a centre, Kane Moody covers both. So, right now, you've got full natural wing options in Kurtley Arendse, Cheslin Colby, Edel van der Merwe, and Kane Moody. Kane Moody's played far more rugby in his career at wing than at centre. Even if he wants to play at centre, even that's the position he wants, he's played more rugby at wing. So, again, we talk about having the hybrid players and how that makes life so much easier. We've only selected 17 backs. We often, and I think about 20 odds forwards. And for me, you could drop an Ethan Hooker out here and we'd cope. You could probably drop another scrum off out here and we kind of cope. So that, for me, that sort of selection of forwards is very settled. I don't think that's going to change bar injuries. Because the players who've been excluded, the likes of Faf de Klerk, likes of Maxwell Mapimpi, age is not on their side. I'm surprised at no Faf over and having Kobus Reinach. I prefer Faf de Klerk. I think he suits the game plan a bit more. So that surprised me. But again, we actually saw this last year as well, him getting excluded. And then they talked about him being back, and he was injured and now he's back. But last year, when they excluded him from the squad, at a similar time in August, there was no talks about him having been injured, inverted commas. He wasn't. It was basically just he wasn't in the squad, and kind of that was that. And now he's been excluded again. So he's obviously very much not part of the long-term plans right now. Going to some of the comments about the fly half, though. David says, to me, Liebach starts and Pollard off the bench, and if Sasha starts, Pollard should be on the bench. Butler says, Sasha's a momentum play. He needs to keep playing to be at his best. Harry reckons Liebach should start, but Pollard should play in the last 30 minutes. Christian says, I agree. Liebach start, Pollard to finish. Yassine says, it must hurt you, Stephen, to admit that Liebach is a better 10 than Sasha Famagama Zulu. I mean, if you've been watching over the last few years, you'd know I'm a Molly stan. I love the man. I was asking for him to come to the Lions because I said he's being wasted there. Doesn't mean I can't appreciate it. Sash Famagomazulu is a generational talent. I think we're very lucky to have all three, to be honest. I would start Mani against Australia. 100%. I would have no problem starting Mani tomorrow against New Zealand. So, not really, to be honest. I'm very happy to see that Mani winning that poll. I think that shows you that people are coming around to him and understanding what he brings. So East Coast saying, stocks are deep in SA Rugby. Remember, we're currently living in the good old days. Enjoy every minute. Daniel was saying earlier, will the players that were sent home go play Curry Cup or stay with the squad to give cover or give pictures of Australia? No, they will not stay with the squad. They have been released to play in the Curry Cup. Having them are placed on standby. So those are Ilukanya, Sam Murat Mapimpi, Evan Ruas, Neil Devishia, Vincent Tuka. But the other players have been released and can play, Curry Cup. So somebody like, who do we expect to see in the Curry Cup? I'm trying to work out the players who have been released, who are not on the standby list, and who actually play in South Africa. Because that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so I think basically some of the players who haven't played recently might play in the Curry Cup because obviously they're not in camp this week. So, for example, we might see a Morne van den Berg in the Curry Cup for the Lions this weekend. We might see Moneybox no longer contracted Stormers, so he can't go play for Western Province, but maybe we'll see Kobus Reinach playing for the Western Province this weekend. I think that's basically what it says. It doesn't really clarify that particularly well. But it says a handful of players have been released to go play Curry Cup. So when we get the Curry Cup teams announcements, which will start tomorrow and Friday, then we might see some players actually involved that are going to get a bit of a run. So looking at that poll, 55% for Marty Liebach, love the work. I'll start him as well. I agree. I 100% agree. I'm all for that. Start Marty Liebach against Australia. I think he makes us a lot better as a team. His goal kicking did look a lot better. Whether it'll stay that or not, we'll wait and see. But looking further into the squad, I just think that we've got so much. I mean, you think that Caden Moody, Andre Estes, and Ed van der Merwe wouldn't probably make our World Cup final team tomorrow. Neither maybe would Willems or Fassi, one of the two. I mean, how lucky are we to have those sort of players? I mean, Ed van der Merwe has got 5 tries in 3 games and has looked so comfortable. And yet, you wouldn't blink if you missed out on the Bok team tomorrow. And that shows you how good our wings currently are. Kenny Moody had 2 fantastic games. You're not going to drop him you're not going to drop Jesse Creel for him. Andre Estes is a hybrid player. It'd be interesting to sort of see if he gets more game time now as that hybrid player versus Damien Delendi. Because now you can have Andre Estes on the bench, but that's not necessarily going to mean he's going to replace Damien Delendi. From a scrum-off point of view, Morne van den Berg is being pushed by this Bok management. They rate him. Look, he did get a man of the match performance at Loftus, as much as some people really didn't enjoy him. He did get man of the match. So we are going to see more of him. I think we will see him against one of the Australia games, which is good. And I think we all know that kind of Grant Williams right now is our best scrum half. It's kind of who backs him up. Morne van den Berg versus Kobus Reinach. Kobus Reinach has not come off the bench a lot. He's often been our sort of second choice starting 9. Especially during 2023, we sort of had 4 9s, and we often had a starting 9 and a replacement 9, and then a different starting 9 and a replacement 9. And Kobus Reinach, especially 2019, for example, and even sort of 2022, 21, was often our alternative starting 9. Contender's back. Contender's been a while, saying I think they will try Pollard at 12 as one of Rassie's experiments. It'll open up the back line a bit more in the second half. Could we see an all-scrum back 3 of 11 Orange, so 14 Ed van der Merwe and 15 Colby? I don't think we'll see Colby start at 15. I think you might see a move there, depending on injuries and the way things go, but I'd be very surprised if we do see him start over there. So I think my prediction for the first test, from a backline perspective, I think it goes Grant Williams, Mani Liebach, Kurtley Arons, Damien Delendi, Jesse Creel, Jason Colby, and Aplele Fassi. That would be my prediction for the first test against Australia in Ellis Park. Down in Cape Town, it wouldn't surprise me if we see Damien Willems come in. He knows the conditions very well. It wouldn't surprise me if we see Andre Esterhuizen on the bench for either of those games, but specifically for Cape Town. And I think we might see a Sash or a Andre Pollard start in Cape Town. I would love to see Mali Liebach start in Johannesburg. It makes so much sense. at Ellis Park, dry conditions, let Marnie and Grant Williams cook because it will just suit them down to a T. It'll be a fast-paced game. Get the ball into those hands, let them cook. You've got to go for me, Grant Williams and Marnie Bach for that first test in Ellis Park. Down in Cape Town, end of August, very likely to be wet. You can look at a Andre Pollard. For me, you look more at Damian Willems. You look maybe more at then you can go for an Andre Esterhuizen run off the bench potentially as an eighth forward, an auxiliary forward there. And I think that becomes quite an exciting combo. But I do think, especially that Ellis Park test, you've got to release Marnie and Grant Williams because with a fast-paced game, those two will rip that Australian side apart. What I'm looking forward to at the moment is seeing which players are going to be involved in the Currie Cup from an under-20 point of view. As I said, 3 of these players involved in the training camp. Harshan Pede, Batubile Hlakani, Cheswell Jooste. And it's interesting that we've seen Interkosa Makaza, for example, coming in as a wing. Cheswell Jooste now being involved as a wing. We've got fantastic wing stock, but we're always looking to add to them. And I think Cheswell Jooste, he's absolutely rapid. But you've got an Interkosa Makaza as well. So we definitely seem to be sort of trying to build up our wing stocks. Because I think our wings are a very incredibly important part of South African rugby's game plan. But I think what's important is that they're not just out-and-out finishers. They've got to have that work rate. They've got to have that ability under the high ball. They've got to be defensively good enough. I can tell you right now, Cheswell Jooste is not being brought into the team to learn how to score tries. He's been brought into the training camp to say, right, you need to learn how to tackle the big boys. You need to make sure that when Caleb Clark comes down that wing, you are ready to bring him down. That, for me, is, I think, the big thing when it comes to bringing these wings in. Even in Interkosa Makaza, they're not bringing him in to work on his goal kicking and his finishing. It's about the structures, under the high ball, defense, awareness, positioning. That's what the big thing I think they'll be communicating to these players when they come onto these into these camps. So we're going to call it a day there, people. Got a lot of other stuff to do. Apologies for all the various technical issues we've had. We've managed to get through eventually the show, so it's been fun. But hopefully we'll have less setbacks. It's the fun part about doing this whole thing. The technological issues come with it, and you can't unfortunately do much about it. But we will persevere, and we will have profiles, official profiles on Forever Box, which will have age, caps, all that kind of information. So it's quite a cool thing to look at to kind of understand where the squad is. And we're going to have a bit of a deep dive into the squad very shortly, which will come up on the channel now, looking at who's been dropped, who's been caught in, and where we're looking at age-wise for these players. Please smash like on the way out. Please do subscribe to the channel as well, and we'll see you guys all next